July 2025. The air inside the boardrooms of Stuttgart is usually filled with the confident hum of German efficiency. But on this particular morning, the atmosphere is heavy. Oliver Blume, the CEO tasked with steering one of the world's most prestigious brands into the future, hits send on a memo that will shatter the illusion of invincibility. The text is stark. It is an admission of mortality. He writes that the business model which served Porsche for decades no longer works. He admits that the current crisis is hitting them harder than anyone else. For a company that prides itself on precision engineering, this was a catastrophic mechanical failure of the corporate soul. Porsche's stock price had already hemorrhaged 50% of its value. Profits were bleeding out. The fans, the fervent, religious cult of the flat-six engine, were furious. The world watched in confusion as the gold standard of automotive luxury seemed to be actively dismantling its own legacy. To understand how we got here, you have to understand that this wasn't just a business mistake. It was a philosophical gamble. Porsche bet the house on a future that their own customers didn't want. They tried to sell an iPhone to people who wanted a mechanical watch. And now the bill has come due. The Electric Mirage. Rewind to 2019. The world was a different place. Tesla was no longer a joke. It was a juggernaut. The Model S had embarrassed the German automotive establishment, proving that electric cars didn't have to be glorified golf carts. They could be fast. They could be desirable. In Stuttgart, the executives took this personally. They looked at the electric landscape and decided it was time to remind the world who actually owned the concept of the sports car. Enter the Taycan. This was not a compliance car. It was a statement. When Porsche pulled the sheet off their first fully electric vehicle, the specs were weaponized. 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds. An 800-volt architecture that promised charging speeds the world hadn't seen yet. It was beautiful, wide, and aggressive. The automotive press went into a frenzy. They called it the Tesla killer. They called it the future. The tagline was Soul, Electrified, a clever marketing hook designed to bridge the gap between the smell of gasoline and the hum of the grid. And for a moment, it worked. The reviews were intoxicating. It drove like a Porsche. It steered with the telepathic weight that the brand is famous for. It didn't feel like a numb appliance. It felt like a weapon. Bloom looked at the reception and saw a green light to overhaul the entire company. He unveiled a master plan that was aggressive to the point of arrogance. By 2025, half of all new Porsches would be electric. By 2030, that number would hit 80%. The targets were financial poetry. Operating margins of 17%. 400,000 vehicles delivered annually. Porsche wasn't just joining the EV revolution. They planned to lead it. They were going to take the luxury EV market by the throat. In 2019, they sold 280,000 cars. The growth curve looked exponential. To the board, the logic was undeniable. The market was screaming for EVs. Tesla had just posted its first real profits, signaling that the age of the battery had arrived. General Motors and Ford were dumping billions into electrification. To not pivot was to die. Or so they thought. But there was a ghost in the machine. A hidden pressure that had nothing to do with customers and everything to do with corporate politics. You cannot understand Porsche's desperation without understanding its parent company, Volkswagen, the Wolfsburg Shackle. The corporate structure of the Porsche-Volkswagen empire is a tangled web of family feuds and holding companies. But the power dynamic is clear. Volkswagen is the mothership. And in 2017, the mothership was still wiping the soot off its face from the Dieselgate scandal. They had been caught cheating on emissions on a global scale. Their reputation was in the gutter. To survive, Volkswagen needed a rebrand. They needed to pivot from dirty diesel to clean electric faster than any company in history. They launched Roadmap E, a $50 billion crusade to secure batteries and build electric platforms. This was a mandate from the top. Porsche, as the jewel in the VW crown, was expected to lead the charge. The Taycan wasn't just a sports car, it was a peace offering to regulators. It was proof that the VW group had changed its ways. The pressure to electrify didn't come from the drivers in the canyons of Los Angeles. It came from the bureaucrats in Brussels and the board members in Wolfsburg. This culminated in the IPO of 2022. Volkswagen needed cash, billions of it. To fund this electric transition, they spun off Porsche and took it public. It was one of the largest public offerings in European history, valuing the sports car maker at 78 billion euros. The narrative sold to investors was simple. Porsche is the next luxury tech stock. It is Ferrari meets Apple. And initially, the numbers backed it up. The Taycan was selling. By 2023, it was moving over 40,000 units a year, dangerously close to overtaking the legendary 911. Blum was hailed as a visionary. He was given the dual CEO role of both Porsche and Volkswagen. He was the king of the German automotive world. But in his ascent, he missed the tremors on the ground floor. The sales numbers were masking a rot that was spreading through the ownership experience. The company was celebrating spreadsheets, while the customers were beginning to scream. The silicon trap. The problem with turning a car into a computer is that computers crash. When you buy a Porsche 911, you are buying a mechanical organism. You are buying gears, pistons, and oil. If something breaks, you fix the part. But the Taycan was different. It was a software stack on wheels, and the Volkswagen Group is notoriously terrible at software. As the Taycan hit the mass market, the horror stories began to trickle in. Then, they flooded. This wasn't about the driving dynamics. It was about the basic functionality of the machine. Owners reported screens that would go black at highway speeds. The infotainment system, the nerve center of the modern car, was a laggy, unresponsive mess. The integration with charging networks was a disaster. Porsche promised a 22-minute charge, but that assumed you could find a charger that worked, and that the car's software would actually shake hands with it. Then came the hardware failures. The heating systems failed in the dead of winter. The 12-volt batteries died, leaving six-figure cars bricked in driveways. But the true nightmare was the service experience. Porsche mechanics have spent decades tuning engines. They are artists of combustion. Suddenly, they were asked to be IT support for high-voltage architectures. They weren't ready. A battery shell damage inspection could cost $5,000. A full battery replacement? You were looking at 50 grand. That is the price of a decent Mercedes, just to fix the battery on your Porsche. Cars sat in service centers for months. Not days, months. Parts were on back order. Germany was silent. Owners who were used to the white-glove treatment were suddenly being treated like beta testers for a half-baked product. One whistleblower leak suggested that nearly 60% of early Taycans had battery issues requiring intervention. That is a catastrophic failure rate for a luxury brand. Recalls were issued. Owners were told to cap their charging at 80% to avoid fires. The Soul Electrified was beginning to feel like a very expensive ankle monitor. The depreciation cliff. This reliability crisis triggered a financial phenomenon that Porsche had never really dealt with before: catastrophic depreciation. Historically, Porsches are like gold bars. You buy a 911 GT3, you drive it for 2 years, and you sell it for what you paid, sometimes more. They are assets. But the Taycan was not an asset. It was a piece of consumer electronics, and like an old iPhone, its value plummeted the moment a newer model was rumored. A Taycan Turbo S, costing $200,000 new, was suddenly trading hands for $70,000 just 3 years later. This shattered the illusion of value. The wealthy clientele that Porsche relies on does not mind spending money, but they hate losing it. When you buy a luxury mechanical watch, you know it will last for generations. When you buy a piece of tech, you know it is obsolete in 3 years. Porsche accidentally moved their product from the luxury good category to the consumer tech category. And in tech, yesterday's flagship is today's e-waste. The market reacted violently. Resale values collapsed. Dealerships stopped wanting to take Taycans in on trade-in because they knew they would sit on the lot, gathering dust, while the battery degraded. To make matters worse, in 2024, amidst this collapsing demand, Porsche raised the prices. It was a tone-deaf move born of arrogance. They assumed the badge was strong enough to absorb the hit. The identity crisis. But the failure goes deeper than bugs and depreciation. It touches on the very existential purpose of a sports car. Porsche forgot what business they were actually in. They thought they were in the transportation business. They aren't. No one needs a Porsche to get to work. You buy a Toyota to get to work. You buy a Porsche to feel something. The internal combustion engine is not just a propulsion method for a sports car enthusiast. It is the heart of the experience. The sound, the vibration, the mechanical crescendo of a shift. These are the emotional hooks that justify the price tag. When Porsche removed the engine, they removed the primary differentiator between themselves and a high-end appliance. Tesla succeeded because they sold a new experience. Silence, minimalism, and autonomous tech. They appealed to a new type of buyer who viewed the car as a gadget. Porsche tried to sell EVs to petrolheads. They spent billions trying to synthesize a soul. They added fake spaceship sounds to the Taycan to replace the engine note. It was a tacit admission that the silence was a problem. The data began to show a terrifying trend for Bloom. The sales of the electric models were in freefall, dropping by 50%. But the sales of the gas-powered 911? They were climbing. The customers were voting with their wallets. They were screaming, "We want Porsches, but we want the ones that make noise." It wasn't just Porsche. The entire industry hit a wall. The early adopter wave for EVs had dried up. The mainstream luxury buyer looked at the charging infrastructure, looked at the depreciation, and looked at the price and said no. Even Ferrari, a brand that usually can do no wrong, saw the writing on the wall and slowed its electric rollout. The mandate to go 80% electric by 2030 suddenly looked like a suicide pact. The retreat. The reckoning arrived in the summer of 2025. The memo from Bloom was the white flag. The grand strategy was dead. The wording was careful, bureaucratic, but the meaning was clear. The transition to electric vehicles would take longer than assumed. The goal of 80% electric was quietly modified with an asterisk, dependent on customer demand. That asterisk is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It essentially means we will build gas cars for as long as you buy them. Porsche announced cuts. Nearly 4,000 jobs would be slashed by 2029. The focus shifted from aggressive expansion back to profitability. In corporate speak, that means stopping the bleeding. The pivot back to combustion is now underway. They are looking at hybridizing the iconic 911, using electricity to boost performance rather than replace the engine entirely. They are doubling down on e-fuels, synthetic gasoline that allows combustion engines to run carbon neutral. This was once a side project, a hobby for the engineers. Now, it looks like the lifeboat for the entire brand. Investors were not forgiving. They demanded heads. Bloom is under immense pressure, focusing now on saving the wider Volkswagen Group, which is dealing with its own factory closures and labor strikes. The stock price remains in the basement. The premium valuation they achieved at the IPO has evaporated because the market realized that Porsche is just a car company after all, subject to the same brutal cyclicality as Ford or GM. The lesson of the green owl. So, what is the hidden mechanism here? It is the fallacy of linear progress. Corporate boards love straight lines. They looked at the growth of Tesla and drew a straight line up and to the right, assuming the entire world would switch to batteries in a decade. They ignored the nuance of human desire. They fell victim to the Nokia Trap. Nokia thought they knew what a phone was. They had the best hardware, the best reception, the best battery life. Then the paradigm shifted. But for Porsche, the shift was in the opposite direction. They tried to revolutionize a product that people liked exactly the way it was. There is a profound difference between better on a spec sheet and better in the human heart. An electric motor is objectively better than a gas engine. It is more efficient, has fewer moving parts, and produces instant torque. By every engineering metric, it wins. But luxury is not about engineering metrics. Luxury is about inefficiency. It is about the unnecessary complexity of a mechanical movement. It is about the irrational desire to control a machine that explodes dinosaurs to create noise. Porsche tried to digitize an analog emotion. They built a better machine, but a worse Porsche. The fallout of this will shape the automotive industry for the next decade. We are seeing a massive retraction of EV pledges across the board. The future is not purely electric. It is eclectic. It will be a mix of hybrids, synthetics, and yes, batteries. But the era of the EV mandate is over. The consumer has broken the algorithm. As Porsche licks its wounds and fires up the casting molds for more combustion engines, we are left with a final question. In a world that is increasingly rushing toward digitization, automation, and silence, is the ultimate luxury actually the ability to remain mechanical? Porsche bet against the past, and the past won. The green owl of the automotive world tried to teach us a new language, but we refused to speak it. And now, the teachers are being fired, and the old textbooks are being brought back out. Because sometimes progress isn't about moving forward. It's about remembering what made you valuable in the first place. Drop your thoughts below. Would you buy a silent Porsche, or are you paying for the noise? And if you want to see another giant that refused to listen until it was too late, you need to watch this video on Nissan next.